If you ever want an exercise in humility, play a computer game or even an old-fashioned board game with a fifth grader. Several years ago, I was a counselor at a summer church camp, and most nights after we had wrapped up all the day's activities, we would hang out in the dining hall and together we would play games. Now, one of my campers, very nice young man who just finished the fifth grade, he loved playing a game with me called Rush Hour. Not only did he love Rush Hour, he loved the fact that he could beat me at it. And he would taunt me every single day about how he was once again going to whip me at rush hour that very evening because I was such a rube. Apparently, he was right. Rush Hour is a game of logic. You attempt to slide a bunch of little colored plastic cars around a small board so that a particular car, your car, can exit through a gap in the wall. And the game gets progressively harder every turn as more cars are added. Well, the first time he challenged me to Rush Hour, I took one look at it and I thought, this ought to be easy. It's a logic game, and I think of myself as a logical kind of guy. Plus, it had to do with cars. I drove cars, and this kid did not even have a driver's license. But once we got a few levels into the game, with more and more cars being added every round to the game board, I found myself just completely stuck. I could not figure out the solution, but I was stubborn. I refused to give up and let this taunting fifth grader beat me. So I spent a good 15 minutes or so fiddling around, becoming furious at myself. Why was this so hard? It didn't help that a crowd of adults and kids had gathered around to observe and to be greatly amused at my frustration. When I finally gave up, the young man smugly pointed out that the whole time there had been one gray car which I had not even touched, and it was the car that, by moving it just a smidgen, would open up the traffic jam and let my car out. Now, I did get better at rush hour, but it taught me two important lessons. First, we don't notice all the options available to us most of the time. We have blind spots. We're so deeply into one way of seeing reality, we don't realize how we're limiting ourselves. The second lesson I learned was to never, ever play games with a fifth grader. I love the scene painted for us in a particular scripture passage. The disciples are standing on the beach. They're washing their fishing nets in the surf after a long night of fishing, and Jesus is teaching from a fishing boat to a crowd that's gathered there on the shore. And then Jesus tells Simon Peter to let down his nets out into some deep water because apparently Jesus had noticed they had not caught anything lately, and Simon admits that's true. He says, look, we've been out all night fishing and we haven't caught a thing. But whatever, if you say so. After they row further out into the water, where the water's really deep, and after one drop of the nets, there are now so many fish they have trouble pulling the nets back up. They're too heavy. They're starting to burst. Simon even has to ask other fishing boats for help. There are so many fish. So many, their boats are in danger of sinking. And then what I call the usual Jesus reaction happens. The usual Jesus reaction is that people are amazed. They cannot believe what just happened, so they suddenly believe in him. In the Gospels, this kind of thing happens over and over again. And that's the point of the story where Jesus says to those fishermen, if you think that was impressive, follow me, and let's go catch us some people. I think this story matters to us because, first of all, it's pretty funny, honestly, if you think about it. Here you have these professional fishermen with years of experience at what they do for a living who've been out all night long, trying and trying the same thing over and over again, the same way they've always done it, but not making any headway whatsoever. And then this traveling preacher comes along and points out that maybe they should try in a different spot on the lake, deeper water, over there. And, well, we know the rest of the story. We've all been there. When something so obvious to someone else has to be pointed out to us, and we go, oh, wow, of course. There's this old story about a guy who gets a flat tire and he rolls to a stop just outside the gates of a mental hospital. And now a resident of the hospital is standing just inside the gates observing this guy who's now changing his flat. The guy jacks up his car, he wrenches off all of his lug nuts from the wheel with the flat tire, and he piles the lug nuts up near the curb. He pulls the flat tire off, puts the spare tire on, and then tragically he turns and accidentally kicks all of the lug nuts down into a storm drain. They're lost forever. And he's beside himself. He moans and he paces and he cries, "What am I going to do?" Very calmly, the hospital resident says, "Your solution's quite obvious. Remove one lug nut from each of the other 3 tires, and then use those to attach your spare tire and drive yourself to the nearest auto parts store." The man says, "That's brilliant, but how could you figure that out? You're in the mental hospital." The resident says, "I may be, but that does not mean I'm stupid." There's always a perspective we cannot see, an angle we can't imagine, a workaround we can't fathom, another way of doing things. There are always more ways to live and to think and to be than we can ever realize. And it's all too common for us to look at anything that's different from our current familiar path as being inherently wrong, because we're convinced the right way is to follow the same narrow road we've traveled for years, the same road our parents and grandparents and our teachers and friends and colleagues have all shaped for us. Even the road we follow when we're part of an organization like a church, where so many ways of doing things feel like they're just a given and they can't possibly ever change. And so when things don't work, we beat our heads against the wall for a while until we give up and stop looking for alternatives. But imagine this solution. What if we looked at everything we've ever done so far in our lives, in our careers, and our creative projects, and our relationships? What if we looked at those as research? What if we looked at all we've done as being in preparation for the next step that can take us in new directions? What if we viewed all of our mistakes and all of our successes, all of our failures and triumphs and even disasters as lessons? Taking all of that research, what have we learned? What would our next step be? Where would it take us? I think when we look at life that way, that's when all the options really start to open up. They become more apparent to us. We begin to observe ourselves and what we're doing much more objectively. Because it's only by getting outside of ourselves that we can even begin to have some kind of objectivity. We begin to see all of the options out there that are available. Whenever we feel stuck or confined or frustrated or lost or out of options, unable to see any other pathway, the truth is we're wrong. There's always another option. And usually there are plenty of options to choose from. So of course the question is, how do we find those other options? The good news is it's really not that hard. All it takes is understanding that doing the same old thing again and again and getting no better results, it's a waste of our precious time. It's not what we need to be doing. So it takes the intentional desire to move out of that cycle of frustration. On a personal level, one great technique that really does work for a lot of people is journaling. Very simple. Journaling now is different from keeping a diary or a calendar or a checklist. Journaling is an exercise in self-reflection. It's getting outside yourself and observing yourself and writing down your thoughts and your feelings, very importantly, and asking yourself, self, if I'm having any negative thoughts and feelings about anything, why is that? And asking, what would it look like for me not to think and not to feel that way? What would need to change? When you ask yourself that and write it down in a journal, that's when all the other options start popping up to the surface. They've been there all along. You just couldn't see them until that question was asked. It's amazing. It really works. Another simple technique is to ask other people you admire, people whose opinions you value, what they think, what other options they see. And by the way, that's one of the greatest benefits of belonging to a beloved community like a church. Because at church, we're literally surrounded by people who only want the best for us, who will be there for us in good times and in bad, and who have a lifetime of valuable experiences that go way beyond our own limited vision. So look for all the options that are just waiting for you in others. Now, a lot of folks hear the story of Jesus telling Simon Peter to let down his nets into the deep water, and then a ton of fish were caught. They think of that as a miracle story, and I agree, it is a miracle. I believe in miracles, and I know they happen every single day. They happen when we open ourselves up to hearing and seeing all the options that are right there in front of us. In Simon Peter's case, he simply needed to fish in a different spot, out in the deep water. So our question is, where is that deep water for you and me? Are we going to row out there and put down our nets? Or are we going to keep on fishing in the same old places and be frustrated when we don't catch anything? When we listen enough and observe enough, when we see everything we've done before as research to get us to this very moment in time, and when we're intentional enough to go beyond and out into the deep water to let down our nets, that is where the options are. And that is when miracles do happen. Thanks so much for watching.